The report also states, when asked, neither Shared Services Canada nor the Canada Revenue Agency could confirm whether the invoice levels of activity, which were the basis for charges, were accurate. What is the purpose of a specific audit and evaluation executive if contracts and expenses aren't being properly evaluated?
The vendor invoices that my colleague touched upon briefly, I find it extremely concerning for our taxpayers. The Auditor General stated that invoices were paid with little or no validation. So I'd like to know why.
5 minutes isn't going to do it for me, but I'll see what I can do here.
Mr. Jones, how many millions did your agency and the CRA hand out without verifying work?
In the article, a source with inside knowledge of the CRA was working said that returns were routinely processed electronically without human oversight, even in the cases where millions were paid out that would later raise red flags.
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Tuesday, October 21st, the committee is resuming its review of the report of the Canadian Revenue Agency's contact center and is of the 2025 fall reports of the Auditor General of Canada.
I'm interested in digging deeper into the telephony contract for which SSC was the primary signatory. In 2015, the contract was signed at a cost of $50 million over 10 years, but now a decade later, it has been tagged at $190 million, with an additional $24 million to be added through 2027. Mr. Jones, as President of Shared Services Canada, when you or your predecessor as President of SSC became aware of the massive contract increases through the 18 contract amendments, what would be the process for informing and or receiving approval from the Minister, please?
Well, thank you for the question. I think this actually gives an opportunity to clarify. So when the contract was competed, the Government of Canada put a number of very specific custom requirements, for example, building infrastructure, data centers, etc. So the $50 million that was talked about was never the base of the contract and the total cost. It was the minimum revenue that the company needed to make the investments. And so the contract value in 2017 was given to one of my predecessors, and it was $190 million, and that's what we expected, and that's where we're running at today. The additional money that's being asked is to extend the service beyond what its planned life was. There is a termination date of the contract, and was just extended beyond that. But in general, the way this happened is when we put a contract in place, it goes to the market. We put our requirements out there. A number of bidders came in. Because of the requirement, they will come in and they will say, this is what needs to be done. This was not the government buying equipment to put in our data centers, so we don't pay an upfront hardware cost. They spread that over the life of the contract. But I don't know if either of my colleagues would like to provide more detail.
That's fine, Mr. Jones. Thank you very much. I guess what I'm really trying to get to the core of here is a contract which is more than quadrupled in size, cost Canadians hundreds of millions of dollars, and according to the Auditor General's report, hasn't met CRA's objectives, received scrutiny and final approval from who, please?
So the authorities that were granted were actually up to $300 million for this contract. Of which we are currently planning on the $190 million. That was the projection in 2017. The $50 million was the investment, the minimum revenue that the vendor needed to recoup for their physical investment. So that was in the original submission, and it is on track for the original contract submission.
Thank you. It does unnerve me a little bit that you do talk about how the $300 million, when it's not utilized, I don't think we can make light of an expenditure of $190 million, especially where there were so many significant 18 specifically contract amendments. The Auditor General spoke to cases where system outages impacted callers and that the contract signed by SSC didn't even consider whether performance penalties would apply to IBM. Why would that be?
That's actually one of the most important lessons learned. Because the government put in unique requirements, it meant that the standard commercial clauses were not what was being measured. So we put in unique measures for things, and it made it very difficult to hold the vendor to account. I can tell you that the vendor took those very seriously to respond to the performance issues at the beginning of the contract. But because of the way we learned a hard lesson on this, to put in commercial standard terms and conditions that you can hold vendors to account, not government-specific terms and conditions or government-specific requirements, which makes it very hard to hold them to account because it muddies their waters. And that's actually one of the biggest lessons that was applied in that not only the subsequent contact center contracts, but also many of our other contracts where we use standard terms and conditions that are used in the commercial world so we can compare apples to apples.
And I appreciate that. As my next question was going to be, IBM ensured that guarantees were built into the contract. It's why the contract, as you have indicated, was signed with a minimum work guarantee of $50 million. And did you not think it would be wise to include assurance measures within this contract? Did your agency expect the contract to rise above $50 million over the 10-year period?
Yes.
If so, by how much?
In 2017, the projection was that the contract that was given to one of my predecessors, the contract would be a total of $190 million over the course of its life. And it is right on track for $190 million. That was in 2017. And in 2025, we're at that moment. What is now the growth is an extension of that contract to give time to migrate to the new contact center solution.
Can you provide to the committee the documents behind that, please, Mr. Jones?
We can.
Thank you. Your organizational structure denotes a chief audit and evaluation executive. However, the Auditor General found limited validation of vendor invoices by both Shared Services Canada and the Canada Revenue Agency. The report also states, when asked, neither Shared Services Canada nor the Canada Revenue Agency could confirm whether the invoice levels of activity, which were the basis for charges, were accurate. What is the purpose of a specific audit and evaluation executive if contracts and expenses aren't being properly evaluated?
Perhaps I can turn to Scott Davis to talk about the work that was done. Our audit and evaluation, my audit and evaluation, chief audit and evaluation executive needs to cover the entire organization and is complementary to the work of the Auditor General, but it's for the internal management of the organization. What we do is we actually have in our chief financial officer branch, we go through and verify, and maybe Scott can provide some details.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so if I may, this audit focused on the service by Canadians, by the CRA. I look very forward to the Auditor General coming back and doing the investigation that has been highlighted, because as you referred to as those 18 amendments, within them there was over 150 service orders, which are our control points, and we received a full consolidated invoice, and we used a splitting tool between CRA and the other departments that are on this solution, and that's how we did our validation. So the validation that was verified was at the CRA level, but I'm looking forward to working with the OAG and our internal audit team to actually provide that transparency to this committee and to Canadians.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones, the Auditor General found that there was cases of telephony system outages that impacted callers and agents. In your opening statement, you mentioned outages are stable. How can this be predicted?
So thank you for the question. It's since 2021, the system has been up, reliable, stable, according to what our contract requirements are. Prior to that, there were outages, and that was one of the major points that we had with the vendor, was to make sure that those were prevented. Every outage prevents our partners from being able to do their business, and it's unacceptable, especially for a system that we had specified to be highly redundant. That is something that the vendor did address. There were a number of vulnerabilities. Perhaps, though, Ms. Kristen could provide some more detail on that. She was certainly following these exceptionally closely.
Yes, thank you for your question, Mr. Chair. We have established service level targets in a number of areas around the availability of the telephony platform, the availability of the help desk, and how quickly the vendor responds when there are reported incidents. All of these service levels are monitored and reported on, and we have a very strong and collaborative working relationship with the vendor on this contract, and that has enabled us to focus on platform improvements and identifying root causes and corrective actions when issues arise. And when incidents do arise, SSC has a very robust and mature process to report, monitor, and communicate the vendor's progress in responding. And once resolved, we work on those corrective actions. And as President Jones just mentioned, we've had no critical outages since 2021. So it's a highly reliable platform.
Oh, that's good to hear. In the cases that the Auditor General looked at, did Shared Services Canada offer any service credits or performance penalties for the impacted callers?
Well, we have evaluated on several occasions whether or not service credits could apply, and we have evidence of that. However, the outage must meet the certain criteria as specified in the contract, and this was one of those lessons learned that Deputy Jones referred to that we've now applied to the new cloud contract, where we're accepting commercial terms and conditions. So under the current contract, it was determined that we were unable to apply credits because we were unable to attribute the sole accountability to the vendor. And that was due to how complex and integrated the solution is with our telephony service provider and the other services that Shared Services delivers. However, despite us being unable to apply service credits, the technology has not had a critical outage since 2021, and we've applied those lessons learned to the new cloud contract.
Thank you. Was it the best possible option to spend money on a contract with other vendors to do the centers, or could it have been done in-house?
That's thank you for that question. It's always a debate. Should we insource the work or outsource? In this case, the commercial market is moving very quickly, and we want to take advantage of the most available commercial features, and I think this is one of those areas where it's best to ride the wave of commercial innovation. Every organization that uses a contact center is investing in the new solutions we have. I think if I could turn back time and go back to 2013 and 2014, I wasn't working at SSC, but I think the piece that I would have argued for is to leverage more commercial standard technology rather than a custom-built infrastructure. And this is one of those areas where commercial innovation in this space is going to very quickly outpace with the addition of artificial intelligence, the augmentation tools for our call center agents that'll help the Canada Revenue Agency, but also all the other partners. Those are things that are just, frankly, running very quickly in the commercial side, and industry is demanding those, and they're holding them to account. So the more we stick to standard commercial terms and conditions, the more we can adapt and adopt technology when it's available and been proven. That's what a commercial contract gives versus, or taking standard commercial contracts versus us building something custom where everything would be a change order and a unique build for us. We would fall behind. So those are typically what we decide. But in this case, I think it's best to leverage the industry and what we can get from them, so we can keep up with CRA and our partners' demands to deploy the cutting edge.
I'd like to turn to the issue of vendor invoices that my colleague touched upon briefly. I find it extremely concerning for our taxpayers. The Auditor General stated that invoices were paid with little or no validation. So I'd like to know why. I'd like to start with Mr. Page from the CRA, and then moving possibly to Mr. Davis to answer that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So maybe just to clarify roles and responsibilities in the process. So at the CRA, we do not approve the invoices that come from the vendor. This is done by our colleagues at SSC, who then distribute the costs across the partnering departments. So our process internally is to look at the invoice. We have experts that have looked at the forecast, compared the invoice, and make sure that it's reasonable, and also ensure that the amounts that have been included in the SSC invoice are reflective of the amount that we had planned to spend. So there is collaboration between our IT team, the clients, as well as our financial teams to make sure that these invoices are looked at. But we're looking at the SSC invoice and not necessarily the invoice coming from the vendor.
So when you look at the invoice, are you comparing when they bill on how many agents were actually used in the details of the invoice? Is that one of your responsibilities?
So what we get in terms of information is mostly looking at forecasting volume. So looking at the forecast, looking at the number of agents as part of that forecast, but there's multiple lines of expenditures on the invoice.
But would it be your job to add up, say, hours consumed, or just add up if the contract, the IBM, did their job, ignoring the price of it, meaning verifying what was done on the invoice? Would that be your job for clarification?
So Shared Services Canada gets the detailed invoice, which includes those details.
But do you validate them? Is that part of the job or no?
We don't see the IBM invoice. We see the invoice from Shared Services Canada.
Okay. Then I guess the same question would go to Mr. Davies, please.
Question. So just to give some clarity, so we get it's a consolidated invoice. So we brought together 13 contact centers. Sorry, I'll bore you for a second. We brought together 13 contact centers together in a single invoice. We get a detailed invoice by line item. So there's several line items in which a department can come in this example with the Canada Revenue Agency, they'll ask for, and I won't bore you through all that, there's 5 or 6, 7 components within the contract. They provide us a forecast on how they're going to consume the number of agents, the number of screen captures, there's a whole series of items. That's why I'm looking forward to the Auditor General coming back and going through this level of detail. I don't believe they did so in the first one, but we'll work with them to provide that detail. We take that forecast that they provided us, we get the invoice from the vendor, and we do a post-payment verification. So we get the Section 32, which is, sorry, I told you I was going to bore you. It's the
We got an accountant on here, so you're not boring him, maybe me.
We use the Federal Administration Act. We have the verification by the partner, in this case, Canada Revenue Agency. They confirm this is what they asked for. We take that confirmation from them. We size it against what they've asked for. We add it up with what the other partners, and including ourselves, as Deputy Jones mentioned, we use this service, and that's the validation that we do, and then we make the payment to the vendor. So we have a fairly control framework. I want to just reassure you we do.
So would you then not agree with the AG's report on that?
I think the focus of the audit was on the Canada Revenue Agency and how they provide services to Canadians and the accurate information. I think the next audit that the Auditor General said they would like to come in and do, will be able to provide evidence and come back to this committee and parliamentarians and Canadians to explain that we do safeguard Canadians' tax dollars.
I would like to now turn on to the $50 million that is projected to be $214 million. We've heard explanation on that. One thing I haven't heard today is addressing what we would simply put atrocious service by the AG's findings. So if it's $50 million or $214 million, some would say it ain't worth 50 grand. So my question, Mr. Page, is the service was very, very, very bad, and Canadians it's their taxpayer dollars. They're very upset. What's going to change?
Take that.
Thank you for the question. Perhaps I'll attempt to answer it. So with the platform that was provided through the IBM contract, the HCCS, it allowed the agency to move the yardstick forward a great deal with regards to providing service to Canadians, because it finally allowed us to implement features that we didn't have before, such as call recording, which we mentioned last week, call routing, agent profiles and skilling, and so on and so forth. There is some functionality in that contract that we did add on, and then there's other functionality that the agency chose not to implement for a variety of different reasons, mostly because it didn't quite meet the business needs or the outcomes that we were seeking for Canadians. What's different with the new contract and working with Bell is that it's really an outcome-based contract, which will be able to define pilot and experiment with features and functionalities to determine that they do best serve Canadians in the way that we want without having to turn them on completely.
Thank you. I'm afraid that is your time, Mr. Keurig.
Thank you.
We'll come back to you, I'm sure.
I understand that there is a new call scheduling pilot that's been run as part of that plan. Is that correct? So, Ms. Surjak or Mr. Skinner, maybe I'll ask you what the impact of that call scheduling pilot has been on the service levels that we're seeing now.
Absolutely happy to take that. So that is part of our accelerating service modernization pillar of the 100-day plan, and it gives us the opportunity to experiment with features that we believe would be most impactful for Canadians. So the call scheduling one, there's two things that I want to mention there. One is if we have put in place the ability for a Canadian to schedule a callback from the CRA on a topic that is very popular, the disability tax credit. So it's a very specific area of focus that will allow us to test whether or not it is serving Canadians' needs, so to determine whether or not we want to roll that out to a broader base of topics. The other thing that I will mention is that it was launched last Monday, is there's a new functionality through the portal's My Account called Manage Balance. And that particular functionality allows a Canadian to schedule a callback related to payments that they may need to make to the CRA. That has been hugely popular since its launch last week. I believe that we have received over 10,000 requests for scheduled callbacks, and we are monitoring that very closely to help inform from a business intelligence standpoint what this could mean to other potential callback topics at the agency.
Okay, so 10,000 requests for callbacks. Do you have a measure of, like, are the callbacks happening? How quickly are those being dealt with?
So the callbacks related to the disability tax credit, which is the first that I mentioned, the idea is to call back the Canadian in 2 business days. So it's not a precise time or day or a schedule. It's within 2 business days, and those are happening. And I believe that since that was launched at the beginning of September, I don't want to lead you astray, but it's we've had maybe close to 1,000 requests for a scheduled callback. What we're seeing is that Canadians are calling because they want resolution of their file faster. Mm-hmm. We are offering the callback service to assist them from an eligibility standpoint, from a how to apply standpoint, but it's certainly not necessarily resolving their cases faster, which is why we are also making great efforts to tackle root causes, as you mentioned in your question.
5 minutes isn't going to do it for me, but I'll see what I can do here. As a CPA in public practice, over 26 years, I've seen a lot of changes in CRA and how they've dealt with both fraud and taxpayers and tax preparers. So I've got a few questions here. I'm going to jump all over the board here, just because of some of the questions you've answered. The last one you had stated about doing changes with My Balance, new features, callbacks. They've had callbacks for corporate questions for quite a long time, and I'm not sure why that has been not been the feature so much on general tax on that call center. Can you tell me who makes that decision and why that's never been a choice before?
Thank you for the question. On the general inquiries line, there is the opportunity, and there has been for quite some time, to request a callback. And that happens when we have enough capacity and availability to respond to Canadians on that same day. But if you don't have the capacity,
they get hung up on. They were.
That I can't confirm if someone was hung up on.
I've had it done several times where you call in and it's, we're too busy, sorry, call back later, click, and versus the sitting on hold. So I go back to the question last week. You talked about part of that was probably because they didn't want taxpayers sitting on hold for a long time. And this may not be necessarily your answer either, but who is responsible? Is it CRA or is it with the shared services on determining because we've talked a lot about the requirements. Who's responsible to say, if it's 30 minutes, that's too long, we should have more people. If it's 30 minutes long for them to wait on hold, or hours, which it was in the past, who's responsible to say we need more agents to be online? Was that in the contract for shared services, or is that CRA to say, yeah, we need to improve our service levels? And who's seeing those levels? Because it sounds like your shared services seeing the service levels, but CRA is the one saying we need to have more people. So it seems to me that you guys need to talk together a little bit more, but who's responsible for those?
So our responsibility for shared services is to ensure that the service is available, no matter how many call center agents are there. And then as the consumer, whoever's the consumer of the service is responsible for staffing that. So in our case, we use this contract for our help desk service. It's our job to make sure that shared services has the people to answer the help desk calls that we have to meet our service standards. And then in the case of CRA, I'll turn it over to CRA.
So CRA's telling you this is the service level, and you're responsible to say this is the number of agents to meet that service level?
No, we just provide the base. We make sure that the base service is there according to the contract, and it's in CRA's hands.
Okay, then I'll do one extension from that. If the service quality is not up, that's back to CRA to say the answers are not being responsible. It's got nothing to do with service or shared services. They're not the ones making the determination as to whether the answers are correct either. So it's all up to CRA to make those determinations. So in this, I think it was Mr. Jones that said that there's improvements in the contract. Can we have a detailed definition as to the new contract, what is improved in the new contract versus the old one? And can you get probably best for us to get that in writing it as well to know, because you said there's multiple changes, and for us to find a bunch of those, it's difficult on that part of it. I don't know if you can, did you want to respond to, you can get us that?
Oh, no, we absolutely.
Okay, yeah, just better for the verbal than just the head nod. Yes.
Hold on. So, so that will come in writing then, is that right? You kind of left us hanging there for a second, yes. Mr. Stevenson, that is writing worked for you, Mr. Jones, and your team? Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
Ajay, thank you. Back to you, Mr. Stevenson. You've got just over 30 seconds.
I guess I'll take a bit of a selfish stab at one here. To me, in the process of trying to prevent fraud, the systems that have changed have limited tax preparers' situations. How do you see them fitting in to help you as a tool for CRA? Because it doesn't appear that you've considered them a lot, whereas the taxpayers often rely on their accountants and whoever else is helping them, and you've limited them significantly on how they can get new people in to help them.
For the question. So we are constantly working with our partners and stakeholders to find the right balance between service and then also ensuring security for our taxpayers and taxpayer information and so on and so forth. We have made some significant changes to certain processes and procedures to ensure that we are keeping up and one step ahead where possible of potential new fraud vectors or schemes or whatnot. And that is where the friction comes into some of the service, where based on the knowledge and information that we have, we certainly do have to make some changes in processes where we believe that there could be vulnerabilities. But we do work in lockstep with industry associations and stakeholders to ensure that those changes are well communicated in advance so that we can prepare and the taxpayer to adjust.
What was pricing under the contract? How did we pay? What was the price that we paid in terms of, was it per call? Was it per hour that the service worked? Tell us that.
Thank you for the question. So as I said earlier, each line item of the requirements from each one of the partners has a different amount, and it was defined in the contract. So as an example, IVR or screen capture, each one of them has a different amount. So the partner organization would tell us what they wanted from the contract. We already had a predefined price.
Was it by month? Let's say interactive voice response. Use that as an example. how did we pay for IVR? Was it by the number of times the IVR was used? Was it which I don't know how you would possibly quantify. Was it by every month that we used the system that had IVR working properly, we paid X? How did it work?
The consumption was billed by month.
Consumption was billed by month, and in some cases it was a fixed rate, and in some cases it was per call rate?
Depending on the line item in the contract, correct.
Okay. And so you had talked about the fact that we didn't use standard terms. What does that mean? The Government of Canada has a standard template contract. Did we start from the standard template contract of the Government of Canada, or did we use IBM's standard template contract to start?
So we we competitively awarded this contract, and then we got into the final terms and conditions.
Did we start from ours or IBM's?
We started from ours.
Okay. And IBM negotiated changes to ours?
Correct. It's common.
Okay. Very common, normal. What was the issue then in terms of setting service levels and penalties under the contract? Where did we go wrong?
If I could jump in here, I think one of the things we did is ARC requirements. We customized the requirements that the government, and I mean the technical requirements that they built to, according to our specifications, which meant we had no commercial equivalent. And so in that contract, we defined our own terminology. And so, and then we also did things like we embedded certain government services that needed to be used. So for example, we have a contract for 1-800 service.
Yeah.
We said they must use that contract. So as soon as you do that, you take away the accountability of the vendor because we've now put the government in the middle.
What you're saying then is when we negotiated the contract, we left open questions of whether or not penalties were owed in the event of breakdown of certain services because the vendor could then argue that it wasn't their fault because they were forced to use one of our services.
Yes.
Correct. And that's where we went wrong, and that's where you're fixing it in the current contract, correct? And now it'll be easier to impute blame to the vendor when, for example, there's an outage because of the fact that the vendor is solely responsible for certain parts of the contract, correct?
Correct.
Do you have any time left, Mr.
And we're
Craig?
using standard commercial terms and conditions, so there's no ambiguity in what they mean. There's no government definition and vendor definition. It is one definition, and it's commercial.
Okay, Michelle, yeah, take another 30 seconds.
This is the last question I promised. So I'm confused by that, and you said it a couple of times, so I just want to, again, try to get precision out of here. In the contract, whether it was our standard terms, the vendor standard terms, whatever, there would be legal, clear language in the contract that would set that out. What do you mean by that in this case when you're talking about an ambiguity there? I mean, whether or not it was our standard, their standard, I understand that the standards were mixed up in a way that it was difficult to impute blame to the vendor, but what else do you mean by what you're saying?
So what we did was we created ambiguity in the definition. And so by using our definition, we created ambiguity in the interpretation. So when the vendor came in, and that's our issue, and we will never do that again.
Thank you very much.
The Auditor General findings of the limited validation of vendor invoices by both Shared Services Canada and the Canada Revenue Agency. Mr. Jones, how many millions did your agency and the CRA hand out without verifying work?
So I think it's important. Mr. Davis explained the way that we go through and we verify. They were verified, and we're looking forward to showing that to the Auditor General. That wasn't the focus. Perhaps we should have been more proactive in providing the Auditor General's team with that information. That wasn't what. That is something, maybe a lesson learned for us, because we certainly have that. We do verify that. It was verified as the service was first provided. We verified both their billing, how they're generating this every month. As Mr. Davis explained, there was a verification process that went through. And then also this contract is substantially different than the new one, where there is some fixed infrastructure that is built as part of this, but there was a verification process, and we look forward to showing that. Mr. Davis can provide more details on all the steps if that would be helpful.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Mr. Jones. So you're saying there was a verification that was completed, yet this information wasn't provided to the Auditor General. You had mentioned in your opening statement that there was some inaccurate interpretation. Why wasn't this documentation provided to the AG, please?
The fact is this has been a 10-year contract, so there is a tremendous amount of and the way this works is what questions are asked, we respond to. And I think it's really important that we are more open with the Auditor General at the beginning of an audit as the scoping of the audit terms and conditions is done, so we can be clear about some of the challenges that are being faced so we can make sure that we provide that information. Our understanding of the scope and the way we responded was very much on the service side, not necessarily on the contract side, but that's a lesson learned because I'm not asking to put this on the feet of the Auditor General. We need to make sure that we're more proactive in addressing other pieces and perhaps raising a concern if we don't think that we're going in a direction that we think we could, that we definitely can demonstrate. I'm also not saying that it was perfect. I think the way the contract was structured, not breaking down the details by individual departments and agencies so that CRA could have very detailed billing. But that information was there, and that's a lesson that we definitely have applied in the new contract.
Mr. Hayes, why do you believe that this information, this documentation, wasn't submitted to your office? Isn't this an expectation when an organization is audited that they will be open? I believe that this would be the intent and the purpose of the review of the Auditor General is to have access to all documentation and for those entities which are being audited to be completely open with the Auditor General. Do you believe, Mr. Hayes, that the Canada Revenue Agency and Shared Services Canada have the proper resources to verify these contracts?
Thank you for the question. In terms of the verification, we looked in both organizations for evidence of validation of the invoices, and particularly what we were expecting to see, for example, from Canada Revenue Agency, was that there was evidence of validating the usage, number of agents using the system, or the availability of telephone lines, both metrics that are contemplated. However, what is expected when public funds are being spent is that there's a certification that the goods and services have been received according to the contract. We didn't find that evidence when we dealt with the Canada Revenue Agency. I understand Mr. Jones's statements earlier that perhaps in the context of this audit, one area of his organization was responding to the audit questions, while another might have had information that's pertinent to the validation that's done on their part. I think what our finding is showing is that it's important for all of these organizations to be able to show exactly what Canadians are paying for, and that's hopefully what we will be able to shed some more light on when we do our next audit.
And yet, Mr. Hayes, the Auditor General has found through multiple reports now that contracting and procurement is in a state of disarray and that the rules need only be followed by departments to clean up the mess. As a result of her CRA audit, as she announced at this very committee, she's now conducting a separate investigation on the telephony contract itself, as was brought up earlier in this meeting. The findings of that audit likely will not be known till mid to late 2026. However, SSC has already selected a new vendor for telephone services to be implemented in 2027, as discussed earlier. Mr. Jones, can Canadians trust this new contract will be properly vetted and work will be properly scrutinized, even in advance of the AG's next report? And as we've learned from today, will you submit all of the documentation and be open with the Auditor General?
So the new contract is applying the lessons learned that I described before. I can repeat those, but I feel like I've probably said that enough today. But it is addressing the concerns around standard commercial terms and conditions. There's transparency now. We're using commercial pricing with discount, not customized builds with customized prices. So there's transparency for value for money just at the outset in the way the contract was structured from the beginning, and that's something that we are applying. The second piece is how are those going to be validated? CRA will now have the detailed billing information on what features they're turning on, and they will be the ones making those decisions. The contract has been structured so that it'll be both elastic in terms of consumption, allowing CRA to tailor its usage, but also turning on features or turning off features when they are not required. And so that is how the contract has been structured, and it was done competitively. So it was done in the open market, asking the various bidders to come forward and be able to respond to these types of pieces. On the response to the Auditor General side, that is something that we're looking at. This is not typical for us. We have a. I'm not going to say that it's not a relationship with tension sometimes when the Auditor General's coming in, but in general, my organization has been very open in making sure that the right people, no matter what the questions are at the table. What happened here is something we're looking at because it is not acceptable to me. For me, it's about 100% cooperation with the OAG, regardless of what the findings are going to be. And we certainly have the documentation because I've seen it. I was shocked when I read the Auditor General shared a pre-clearance draft. I was shocked with what was in it because I knew that the information was there, and I asked my team at that time. But at that point, it is too late. So that is something that we are absolutely going to fix because it's not acceptable.
Mr. Paget, the government recently announced the automatic tax filing initiative. Will the phone center be able to handle the additional queries on a timely basis, especially since this serves a more vulnerable population and many may not have access to computers or other digital devices?
I'll ask my colleague Melanie to take this question if you don't mind.
So the initiative with regards to automatic tax filing is a significant one. And as part of the planning and consultation and stakeholder engagement, there's going to be a very significant effort with regards to communications. As you're correct, the target population will benefit, there's no doubt, from supportive communications. And then from a phone center or contact center perspective, we are also preparing and have included that in our planning just with regards to the possible phone inquiries that we may get as a result.
Mr. Paget, I'd like to go back to this $4.9 million check issued. I'd like to ask you again, well, continue what my colleague said. What is the human and computer threshold to audit, to look at an audit? What's the number? Is it 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, 5 million?
So what we need to understand is that there are multiple business lines. So we have, for instance, individual income tax, corporate income tax, excise tax, and so on. And so the risks are assessed depending on the nature of the business line. And within each of the business lines, the control are adjusted as such so that we minimize the risk for the taxpayer. Of course, we are not providing the thresholds because that would be giving fraudsters a recipe for trying to defraud the government, and that's why we're reluctant to share that information today.
Okay. And yet they defrauded you for $4.9 million then?
I can't comment on that file.
Thank you. In the article, a source with inside knowledge of the CRA was working said that returns were routinely processed electronically without human oversight, even in the cases where millions were paid out that would later raise red flags. So my question is to Mr. Hayes. You had looked into some of these government benefit evaluations during COVID. After hearing that no controls were in place, or after hearing now that we don't know what those controls are, at the CRA to automatically review corporate refunds under $5 million, should CRA practices be reviewed externally by your office?
Thank you very much. We do review CRA very regularly. I can think of audits over the last number of years that have related to, obviously, the COVID benefits, but we've also looked at tax appeals, collection efforts, and the like. I think the question really comes down to how effective are the controls, whether they need to be reviewed by the CRA. Those are questions for the CRA. What we would be able to bring out in an audit is whether or not they're working effectively. I think the question that's coming up today, and that might be frustrating some members, is about details. And I can understand why the CRA does not want to share specific details in an open session like this. However, accountability can be achieved in other ways, and there might be options for the committee to get there.
Thank you for your answer. I'll concede the rest of my time.
And that is spot on. You've got 2.5 minutes, Mr. Stevenson.
Thank you. I got like 3 questions, so I don't know if we'll get through them. But as a CPA in public practice, when a new client came in the door, my conversation was always that my job was to prevent them from doing something that would raise red flags, and they always say, "Oh, so what's the red flags?" We had many times we'd go to some place in a CPA conference, and they say, "Well, CRA is looking at this and this and this," so we would always know that. Now, most of the time, when we got to there, it was documentation. If you couldn't prove it, CRA said, you're guilty unless you can prove otherwise. So documentation, as the auditor said, is I'm sure, Mr. Jones, you were probably correct, and you did probably do some of those things, but didn't have the proof and the documentation, so therefore it didn't exist as far as the auditor is concerned. So that being said, when there's any of these problems going back, what are the punishments when it comes to human error, and what are the corrections when it comes to on the digital side? If it's digital, it's kind of like, oh, well, it was a mistake because the computer looked at it. Because a lot of times when we look at these, as I say, to avoid red flags, I would be submitting electronically, and a person often would never see these. So the computer's doing it. So what corrections do we have on there, and who's responsible for that versus the people that are maybe looking at the paperwork and not submitting for punishment on making these big, letting these fraud things go through?
So I'm assuming the question's for us?
Yeah, it's straight for you.
Okay. So what we have to understand is the risk landscape continuously evolves, and what's important for us is that we keep track of what are those changes, how do we adjust to those changes, and how do we adjust our control framework around those risk areas. I would say to your question as to who is accountable, when there are I guess, situations where perhaps control could have been improved, we look at what are the lessons learned and what can we learn from that experience and what can we adjust.
So we've gone back and forth a few times, said CRA is responsible for a lot of the criteria on where you're going to be looking at those for adjustments. Can you tell me why it took so long? Because you've supposedly now analyzed a lot of the details, but until this 100 days was put in, it seems like a lot of those were ignored. But now that the 100 days you actually are showing that there's progress that seemed to have taken not very long to increase your response times on phone. So why did it take so long for those to happen when in the past it was taking hours to get through, and then the 100-day limit came in and all of a sudden we can get it under 5 minutes again? Can you explain why the 100 days is the only thing that seemed to turn? Is it because the Liberal government
gave pressure? Your time is up. I'll allow an answer, please.
Maybe I can answer that question, so thank you very much. I can say that before the 100-day plan began on September 2nd, the CRA has been making a lot of steps and taking on a lot of initiatives to improve service that may not have reached the level of visibility that it's now getting today with regards to the 100-day plan. The 100-day plan is certainly mobilizing the entire agency towards this service situation, and we're treating it with the highest priority possible. We are also using the opportunity this fall, as our call volumes are diminishing naturally. It is a low peak season for us in order for us to focus our efforts on utilizing the capacity that we have to affect change and pilot and experiment with new things that will move the needle come our high peak season, which is in tax season coming very quickly in February.
Thank you very much.